Afternoon and welcome back to Stewarts Soundbites. We are on episode 31. And today I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Alison Taylor from Frenkel Topping. Loads of you will probably know Alison already, but I'll give you a very brief introduction. You'll all know Frenkel Topping are specialist financial advisors, and Alison is a senior financial consultant and head of training at Frenkel Topping, which keeps you busy. I know that, Alison. um, Alison specialises in advising people about investment of damages after injury awards primarily. And you've been doing that for a really long time now, Alison. So you know what you're talking about. And today we thought we'd do something a little bit different, I suppose, because so many of us have an idea as to what the role of an independent financial advisor is and what role these people play in litigation. And I think traditionally, I don't know whether this is quite right, but my impression is that traditionally we think of an IFA as providing input at the conclusion of a case. We're talking about forms of award, we're talking about investment, and sometimes there's a tendency to kind of pigeonhole IFAs into this specific role. And when we spoke before, we talked a little bit about potential benefits of having an IFA involved at an earlier stage. So I was just wondering whether you could expand on that a little bit.
Well, absolutely. I think that what's really important is that as soon as you know that liability has been admitted, to get us involved. I think one of the most important things about relationship with the financial advisor is building that trust relationship. But it's not only about that. There is so much more that we get involved in pre-settlement. And by meeting the family, I don't know why it is, but because we don't have a titled solicitor, so often families will open up and give us information that they wouldn't necessarily give to you directly. I don't know why, but it happens all of the time, and it's very useful because we make it absolutely clear that if there's anything that's said to us that is important and relevant to their case, we will feed it back to you. But it's not just about that, it's about making sure, first of all, that they've got the maximum benefits that they are entitled to. Yeah. Some firms would do that as a matter of fact, but others may oversee that, and so we will look at making sure that they get a benefits review, which can be done as part of the litigation. So automatically we're sort of forming that bond. But in addition to that, the other expert witness work that we'd be doing is looking at pension loss, also form of award, as you say, looking at PPO. And what tends to happen is that all of those things are left to the last minute, as you say, and then often families are like rabbits in the headlights and they don't know which way to turn, and quite often they don't understand. And so building that relationship, maybe with video conferencing, it's been fantastic just to have one or two calls, or maybe even more than that, so that we're building up that trust relationship where they will ask questions that they maybe feel embarrassed to ask of you, yet feel comfortable to ask me. So it's so useful to have that meeting early on.
Do you find, in your experience, Alison, are those questions mainly related to those things that they tell you that they wouldn't necessarily tell their solicitor? Do they relate mainly to their financial situation, do you think?
Very often it's that, yes.
Yeah.
And it's also about picking up the family dynamic as well.
Yeah.
It's the soft facts, because don't forget, when you're looking at periodical payments, we have to look at the family's preferences, but we also need to give a professional opinion on what best meets the needs of the claimant.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can go in and automatically meet a family and you can see pounds in their eyes, and you have that feeling that maybe it would be best all round if periodical payments are there. Alternatively, you get the opposite, where parents of a brain injured child, for example, don't want to spend anything. They're so worried about money not being there for that rainy day or for when they're not there to provide care, that they're frightened to spend the money now. And so having that time for them to fully understand the aspects of how a financial award can be structured is so beneficial. And
Yeah,
it's just building up that trust relationship. You know, you're with
yeah,
us for years. We come in once liability has been admitted. And so having those extra months, or maybe years in some cases, to build that trust relationship is so beneficial, so that we get
yeah.
it right for the claimant.
And a luxury that we might not necessarily have access to on a case where liability isn't straightforward. And I think it's really interesting that you mentioned the welfare benefits actually, because um, I think sometimes, um, from a solicitor's point of view, a client kind of expects you to know about welfare benefits and to be able to advise on those things. And sometimes as well, there's a bit of pressure on the rehab team and the case manager to know
Yeah,
all about welfare benefits. But actually, it's a hugely complex area that
it is.
changes all the time.
Yeah,
And as we all know, there's a knack to,
yeah,
what's acceptable to the DWP and what they information they need. And so it's a bit of a minefield, really, isn't it, Alison? And it's something that you wouldn't necessarily think of, you know, information that you could obtain from an IFA. So it's interesting that you raised that. And when we spoke before, you referred to yourself sometimes as feeling a bit like a financial social worker, and I found that a really interesting characterization of your role. Can you tell me what you meant by that in a bit more detail?
well, yes. I mean, it's something that Andrew O'Hagan, the journalist and novelist, gave me that title. He over 20 years ago now. He spent a week with me. He was doing an article for the Guardian. And it was sort of career women in the 90s, and he spent a week with me. And in fact, my father turned around and said, "Gosh, he's made you sound like Mother Teresa," which was funny, but. He gave me that title of financial social worker, and I don't think it's any coincidence that myself and in fact a few of my colleagues at Frenkel Topping are all trained as counsellors. I mean, before I became a financial advisor, I trained in mental rehabilitation and social welfare. So I'm a good listener. It is one of my skills. I'm prefer to listen than to speak, in fact, and
Mm.
that way of being enables people to trust you again and feel that they can ask questions and say things that they again don't necessarily want to say to their lawyer directly for feeling stupid.
Yeah.
A lawyer last week, I was on a Zoom meeting with him with a family who have been quite difficult at times, and he said to me on the phone afterwards, he said, "It's taken me years to build that relationship with them." He said, "You did it in an hour. What's the secret?" And I said, "I have no idea, but it's just something that, it's that financial social worker in me, I guess."
Yeah, yeah. And it is with the type of people that you and I work with, Alison, regularly are very vulnerable
Yeah.
people. And I think it's an important point, just generally, not linked to what we're talking about
No.
necessarily, but just generally to kind of remember not to underestimate the importance of listening sometimes.
Yeah.
Because I'm a mad talker, as you might have gathered. I don't mind a good chat, but sometimes it's good to remind yourself of kind of sitting back. Um, and I wanted to talk a little bit about where the IFA sits in terms of the wider team. So I wanted to talk a little bit about to what extent is the role of the IFA linked with case managers, members of the rehab team, other members of the litigation team.
I think it's really important, as you sort of touched on at the beginning. It used to be that we would be brought in and wheeled in at the end, just as settlement is coming upon us. And the more information that we can build on from other members of the team about the dynamics, especially the dynamics, and potential those signposts about financial abuse and so on. It's so important that we get the structure of the financial award right, sometimes against the family's view. And we can't do that without gathering all of the information, and also to open up communication with those other team members so that we can help in terms of benefits advice and so on.
Yeah.
And trusts as well, looking at personal injury trust to protect those benefits. Anything that we can do that is sharing of information, because fundamentally we all care and we all want to do the best for the claimant.
Of
And
course.
so by talking to each other, we can best achieve that, is my view anyway.
Yeah. Um, Last week, Alison, we did a soundbite, and we took, well, not last week, the week before, and we touched a little bit upon financial abuse, which
Yes.
is sadly, um it comes up, doesn't it, in these
Yeah.
cases? And I wondered whether there's any role for the IFA if there are concerns about financial abuse. What role um do you have in those situations, and how do you advise best kind of protecting vulnerable clients when you suspect that there's some financial abuse either going on or on the horizon?
Well, again, that goes back to those early meetings, because
Yeah,
part of those conversations, which sometimes sit more comfortably with me than they might be with you, is talking about potential financial abuse. And I will be
yeah,
able to say to mum, dad, and claimant, look, you're going to be very popular when people know about your money. And you'll be surprised at how many people will suddenly become your new best friend. Or, you're a good looking guy, you'll have a string of girls that sort of queuing up to go out with you, or
yeah,
whatever. And you're a honeypot. And I will say all of these things to them, and it's quite
mm,
easy for me to say them. I feel quite comfortable in doing that because of the years and years of experience. And
yeah,
I'll give them examples of things that have happened to some of the clients that I've worked with, where, a best friend has come round with a catalogue and sort of put a red ring around certain items in a catalogue that they've wanted her to buy. Or
yeah.
the last deputy day that we did, we had a number of clients who were saying that, neighbours in their street were asking if they'd buy them a new boiler, or family members
Wow.
wanting to ask if they would fund their mortgage for them, let alone all the other shysters around, that with the sort of scams that we're all being hit with at the moment
Yeah,
during the pandemic. Uh, and it's about making them aware, and then talking about having a trust if they haven't got a deputyship in place, looking at a personal injury trust,
yeah,
and explaining it in a way that they will understand that it doesn't mean they lose control, because they can be a trustee if they
yeah,
have
of
capacity.
course. Yeah. I mean, I kind of think is that a difficult conversation to have with somebody. But I suppose for most people, actually, if it was me in that position and someone said, you've got to be careful, you've got to just be conscious about, who's suddenly being your pal and what they're asking for,
Yeah.
you kind of think, well, none of my friends and none of my family would ever be like that. That would never really happen to me. And there must be a degree of that when you speak to people in the first instance. But I suppose just raising the issue
Yeah.
is sometimes enough, I guess, just
Yeah.
to be mindful.
And I suppose in a way it's the mother hen in me, but it's also by using real life examples of things that have happened to other clients that they've never expected to happen in their
Yeah,
life, and just saying, well, we don't want it to happen to you. Let's avoid that.
yeah, yeah. Um, we've touched a little bit about upon family dynamics, which can
Yes.
often be very complex in these cases, really tricky. Um, and we've got an episode coming up. Actually, we're talking a little bit about kind of how these types of major injuries that we deal with, these catastrophic injuries, how they impact upon people's family life and particularly their marriages, their
Yeah.
relationships. Um, does an IFA have a role to play in relation to matrimonial advice, for instance?
Not directly, but a specialist IFA like ours will have, just in the way that we talked about financial abuse, because it's the most difficult conversation that you can have with a client as a lawyer, to
Yeah,
say, well, we ought to be adding the cost of a prenup or a postnup, or
yeah,
matrimonial advice, because let's face it, the statistics are that your relationship, if you were already married, is likely to fail statistically, or if you're not yet married and you now marry post injury, statistically your marriage won't last. So therefore we need to find some forms of protection. And again, just as I was talking about financial abuse and that relationship with family and family dynamics, it's easier for me to have that conversation with them and say, look, you know, this is an awful thing to have to highlight to you. Again, it's the financial social worker, I guess.
Yeah.
But you need to be aware of the fact that the statistics say X, Y, Z, and really you need to be thinking about this, and it's something that your lawyers can add to your schedule in terms of costs. And then it's for you to signpost after that. I'm not a lawyer, but I
No.
have this wealth of experience of seeing what happens through the lifetime of a claimant
Yeah.
over the last 38 years. So,
Well, yeah, and it goes back, doesn't it, to what we were saying before about the team kind of information sharing, I guess, and a case manager might see something in a marriage or a problem, you
yes,
know, that kind of ties, and the whole team needs to kind of tie in together. So it's interesting thinking about that linked approach. And as usual, we've run out of time, Alison.
no, it's a
Um,
shame.
I know, but it's been brilliant. It's been absolutely brilliant having you on, and
Thank you.
I've really enjoyed it, and I'm sure that everyone who's watching has really enjoyed it as well, and really had some food for thought there.
Thanks.
We'll provide your email address, Alison, if we may. Um, at the end of this webinar, there'll be a slide with Alison's contact details on, details of the Frenkel Topping website, and of course my email address. As always, if anyone has any follow-up queries or would like to discuss anything on the back of this episode, please feel free to get in touch. And thank you ever so much again, Alison.
That's a
Really
pleasure.
enjoyed it. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.